to Davos right here on ET Now. All through this week, from the World Economic Forum 2016, this is going to be a one-stop shop for everything that you need to know. The summit this year is happening in this beautiful ski resort where temperatures are indeed plunging, just like the mood of the global economy and the economic recovery, which is very, very slow. The summit this time is also happening in the backdrop of very big geopolitical risks, global terror that the world is witnessing, the financial meltdown all across global markets, and of course the pain that's emanating from China and the turbulence that is being exported from there all across the world. So we at ET Now will continue to get you the most informed voices from politics, policy, opinion makers, thinkers, to of course the top corporates, people who are really shaping your world. This evening, it is indeed my pleasure to get to you John Studzinski of Blackstone, who believes that there is more pain in the world than was being initially anticipated. He believes that IMF has slashed global growth forecast to 3.4%, but the actual rate of growth is going to be a lot lower than that. He believes China is a big pain point. He's also someone who's losing sleep over the deflationary trends that the world is witnessing, not just in the developed markets, but in emerging markets as well, thanks to the commodity crash that has happened, which has played a huge part in this. John Studzinski is particularly worried about the consumption patterns that are taking a hit in markets as big as India.
Well, I think growth in the United States, even at 2% of the biggest economy in the world, is still substantial growth. If you look at some of the more attractive sectors in the States, healthcare, business services, professional services, plus you've had a lot of growth of jobs driven by the shale sector. Now remember, the shale sector is undergoing a lot of restructuring at the moment because a number of these shale opportunities have gone belly up. So a lot of those jobs were created through the shale innovation. Professor Obama, that's a real faux pas. Right. President Obama did not approve the pipeline. And had he approved the pipeline, you might have had a continuation of some of those jobs.
Fair point indeed. Let's turn focus and talk about China. I mean, that seems to be the big focus point here in Davos and also globally. People are very worried about what will happen in China because there are two camps. One that believes China is going through a transition period, and the other that believes that China is in an absolute mess. Which side of the two camps are you on?
First of all, let's remember the leadership there is an extraordinarily skilled and well-trained, well-groomed leadership. President Xi is about as good as you can find anywhere on the planet in terms of someone who's had an extraordinary experience. People are often mixing up the need for a readjustment of the economy and the growth with the volatility of the stock market. And they are really two different things. The ability to regulate the stock market and the readjustment of those prices downward is something they've got to get right. And there's no question they're learning that. But the economy and the soft landing is something which the government is well aware of and they are managing.
You know, what concerns us about China is that whatever happens in China is having repercussions around the world, and particularly for emerging markets. We've seen huge outflow of foreign funds. That's point number one. And point number two about China is that the whole commodity crash that China has in some sense triggered, isn't that a point of concern that the world is pondering over? Is that something that bothers you?
Well, remember, China has been responsible for 1/3 of global growth for the last 7 years. So we've had the benefit, the world has had the benefit of China's growth. So maybe the world needs to embrace the fact that China's growth is slowing down. They've announced today 6.9% growth.
That's right.
We obviously think growth next year will be somewhere between 5 and 6%. This year, meaning 2016.
That's right.
And their consumption of commodities is obviously slowing down. Or in some cases has entirely stopped.
That's right.
And remember one other thing, China only consumes 10% of the world's oil. Many people think it's 30 or 40%.
Right.
It's not. Yes. America and Europe consume 40% of the world's oil. They're much more important, and those economies are much stronger.
That's right.
So if anyone's going to get oil prices up, it's going to be demand from Europe and North America and not from China.
So I'm going to speak to you about oil because I know that's another point of concern. Many people believe, especially emerging markets like India that depend on a lot on oil imports. Our fiscal is going to be in a great position in all of that, but also a prolonged period of very low oil prices is going to have repercussions for global economy. We've seen BP and Shell and everybody else slash jobs. We've seen crude prices test levels of under 30. Where do you see crude settle? And when do oil prices begin to inch up?
the amount of production available, the fact that no one is setting constraints on their production, there's no question that prices can remain between minimum $20 and $30 a barrel, certainly for the next 2 to 2.5, 3 years.
Just before I move on to India, and I know you were a big bet, you have big bets on India, I want to ask you a question on the US Federal Reserve. They began the whole process of increasing rates. There has been one rate hike. But given the global turmoil and given the economic reality that the world is witnessing, do you believe Janet Yellen can continue to hike rates, even though she may do it at a very deliberate, at a very, a very sustained, slow pace?
I think she said that she's going to increase rates several times this year. I think she'll probably increase rates no more than once. So there is a concern about disinflation or deflation, and that is one thing that she's been very wary of, given her knowledge of what's happened in Japan historically.
All right, let me just turn focus from India and take 2 quick last questions, and this is on the PE and the VC deal. A lot of experts around the world believe that the next sticking crisis will be in the PE and VC deals, given the leverage and the series of follow-up funding that has happened in the last 8 odd years. Is that something that PE and VC deals, yes. Is that something that's bothering you?
No, you're actually the first person who's ever raised that. PE, I think if you look at if you look at leverage right now in certain spaces, there is a lot of leverage in the oil shale space, as we talked about earlier, in the United States. And some of those companies are having to restructure their credits. I don't really think this is something, there's really no concern at all or focus at all on the private equity space. One of the things that you'll note is since 2008, the amount of leverage that's gone into private equity deals is substantially less than what you saw in the period of 2000 to 2008.
So at least that's one less area to be worried about in this world today. One last question. In 2008, 2009, we did see a lot of distressed deals happen around the world. Is the time again ripe and right for those kind of deals to happen in the world in 2016?
And when you say distressed, how do you define distress?
Because companies that were in trouble or sectors that were in trouble, we did see a lot of deals happen in there.
I think the major area of consolidation right now, driven by balance sheet fragility, is going to be certainly in the oil space in North America.
Amidst a raging debate on the quality of telecom services in India, the call drops that all of us have been witness to, and of course the fact that India is trying very hard to get the people offline, online, push the broadband initiative, make Digital India a success. My next guest is a voice that matters. Randall Stephenson from AT&T is not just somebody who's a big stakeholder in telecom, but he's also somebody who's a big stakeholder in the Indian telecom story. Now, Stephenson for once believes that for anything like this to be a success, or for the quality of service to improve and call drops to reduce substantially, telecom operators need huge undivided chunks of spectrum, something that India lacks and something that telecom operators in India have spoken about for a while. That's Randall Stephenson of AT&T.
But I don't see India differently than any other market in the United States. You want high quality mobile networks, you need a couple of things. You need good spectrum depth, good spectrum footprint that's allocated in a way that the carriers can put it to good use. You have to be smart about how you allocate spectrum. And the second is make sure you have tax laws and a regulatory environment that is conducive to investment, because it takes amazing amounts of investment to make high quality wireless networks work. As you know, we're doing this in Mexico now. We're building a network from scratch. We started out with good spectrum depth. The Mexican government did a very nice job of giving us good spectrum depth, and now we're investing aggressively.
So do you believe and are you somebody who shares the concern that investments in India are stalled because there is very little spectrum that's being handed out to operators, and that's one of the reasons why quality of service suffers there? Is that a concern you share as a global player in telecom?
If you don't start with a good deep block of spectrum nationwide, whatever you're trying to cover, you cannot cost effectively invest in good quality service. So it starts with spectrum policy. You've got to get that right.
You know, India is making a lot of noise about Digital India initiative, getting people, the unmapped people online, the broadband connectivity. A lot of that really depends on spectrum, and like you rightly spoke about. But I want to specifically speak to you about this whole 4G, the data drive in India that the government is trying to push. What are some of the things that it's incumbent upon, and more specifically, what are the global lessons that India can learn when it wants to get the offline lot online?
get the offline load online. Well, it all flows from the same place, right? I mean, if you can't get to 4G without the same basic principles we spoke of earlier, spectrum depth and network investment. But the world is now moving to 5G. 4G is matured around the globe. In the United States, it's very mature. It's covering the entire United States. We're deploying it in Mexico. Our work now is getting the standards right for 5G.
That's right.
And countries need to be moving ahead with this, or they're going to be left behind.
One last question on India, and before I let you go, and that really is on the cost of investments in India. 4G is a space that everybody is excited about, but 4G is also a space where there are way too many operators. You've got a Reliance Jio coming in, you've got an Airtel, a Vodafone, some of the operators that you work with more directly. So my larger question is that, in an environment like that, obviously pricing is going to be an issue, and pricing power is not with the Indian telecom operators. What would you say for a market like India, where there is bottom tariff, rock bottom tariff, and still very cutthroat competition?
Look, if you're a public policy maker in any country, you have to balance the need between low price and high quality. And where is it that you want to be? You can't have both. You can't have hyper aggressive competition with multiple players and high quality, deep intensity of investment in the networks. And so as a policymaker, you have to make a decision, and it's a conscious decision that must be made.
Telecom operators around the world, and I want to take it more big picture right now, are under a lot of accusations as far as net neutrality is concerned. It's a big debate around the world. If you speak to the operators, they say that you cannot treat the over-the-top content providers at par with, you should treat them at par with us. Which side of the whole net neutrality debate are you on? Do you believe there is a lot of noise and some very intelligent communication is perhaps being drowned under the noise around it?
Yeah, I don't make an argument about net neutrality per se. You need to define what that means. Do I believe networks should be open for all players? Sure. Do I believe that there should not be prioritization of networks for very selective people on the network? Sure, I completely agree with that. But you can carry this argument to places that, it gets outside of the net neutrality debate. So I'll stop right there at that point.
All right, coming up next, right here on Davos Direct, is going to be John Veihmeyer in an exclusive conversation here with ET Now. He's the chief executive of KPMG, and he keeps in touch with the really high-profile corporate clients to find out what their mood is and what their take is, not just on the global economy, but also on the pain that exists around both in the commodity world and equities. Good to be back with you once again on Davos Direct right here on ET Now. My next guest is John Veihmeyer, the Global Chief Executive of KPMG, who for once believes that markets or the market turmoil or the economic recovery is all going to be incidental and is all going to be dependent upon the geopolitical crisis that the world is seeing. He believes that is going to be a big talking point in Davos. He's also someone who believes that China should be given a chance and believes it's an economy in transition. He believes that China is undergoing a phase of change. While politics and economy try to balance things out in China, this is bound to happen. Pain from China, he believes, is also on account of the commodity crash that has happened. But for one, John Veihmeyer is of the strict opinion, just like a lot of other CEOs here in Davos, that it's going to be the geopolitical crisis that will dictate terms on global economy going forward.
I actually think geopolitical risks right now are much more significant than market risks in terms of impact on business. So I start there. China slowing, which I don't overreact to, but it's clearly a factor that's going to impact global growth for some period now. Those are probably the two most important ones that I would focus on.
IMF for once has slashed the global growth forecast once again. It's down to 3.4 than the previous 3.6% for this year. It's also slashed for next year. They believe China is a point of concern. But according to you, do you believe we are going, or the world is going to grow at 3.4%, or actual levels of growth are going to be lower? And what are the points for concern there?
The IMF's in a much better position than I am to predict an actual growth level. I will say from where I sit, and I spend a lot of my time out in the marketplace meeting with CEOs of some of the major companies in the world, I am more optimistic than I think many of the reporters today. I think there are places around the world that are still, I think, great opportunities for investment and growth. The U.S., certainly, India are two real shining stars, I think. And, Oil prices, which is another thing that is talked about a lot, actually is a double-edged coin. And there are many consumer-based economies in the world where the price of oil is actually, I think, going to continue to accelerate growth.
John, you've put it rightly that US and India seem to be the shining spot. But let's talk about the gloom before we talk about the good that the world is witnessing. And the gloom also is coming from China. Many people are beginning to draw the parallel with what's happening in China, with what happened with the global economy in 2008, where China is exporting turbulence to the world. Are you somebody who's losing sleep over China just yet? A lot of experts are.
Yeah, I would say I'm taking a much more balanced view toward China. I think the slowdown that we're seeing in China to many, extents is very predictable as they transform the economy there. We've known that's coming. We've seen this growth beginning to slow for some time now. And I'm not saying it's not a concern because of the carry-on impact it has to a number of other economies around the world. It's very real and it's having a dampening impact. I just wouldn't overreact to it right now. I think the key in China, and I've said this before, is how well leadership in China does managing the transition of their economy. And as long as people believe and have confidence in the fact that they'll be able to manage through this transition, I wouldn't overreact to concerns about China.
The two views out there. One view that believes China is in transition, the other believes China is in a mess. We'll leave the two views there. But let me also take the opportunity to ask you a question that some of the experts here in Davos are talking about, and that's the deflationary concerns that the world is seeing. Consumption is down in every economy in the world, including in India, where demand was a big talking point at one point in time. How worried are you about the deflationary concerns, especially given the commodity crash that the world has witnessed?
Well, I think commodities are driving a big part of that deflationary
yes.
pressure that you're referring to. So clearly energy-dependent economies are feeling the effects in a major way. But again, these energy has a double-edged kind of impact. And if you're an energy producer, you see that from one perspective. If you're a consumer-based economy, you see energy prices today from a very different perspective. So I think deflation is a concern. I think the central banks are very much focused on that as they establish and continue to drive monetary policy. But in my view, it's being largely driven by commodities.
I also want to now focus to you about investments. You have a whole host of corporate clients. Given what the world is witnessing right now, you rightly pointed out the geopolitical risk, the global terror, and of course the financial markets in some sort of a turmoil. Are they holding back on investments, especially in countries like the emerging markets that we refer to?
Yeah, I think from an emerging market standpoint, there's still a very long-term perspective that many of these multinationals are taking. And if you look at a region like Africa, even though there may be some short-term turbulence and short-term economic stress for sure, I think companies that are investing there because of the potential they see in Africa 10 years from now, 20 years from now. What you are seeing, I think, is the pace of investment being affected. And it's not a on-off switch of am I investing or not, but I think they're trying to make sure that it's a measured approach to the way they invest in some of these emerging markets in light of the current economic situation.
Now, India has very often been referred as the shining spot in global gloom. How true is that? And do Indian CEOs agree with this? Of course, we did catch up with a whole host members of Indian industry to ask their views on the whole fiscal deficit debate that's raging back home, the pace of economic reforms, and what should the focus of Budget 2016 be. They also did answer our questions on is India really shining and is it really a warm spot amidst this global gloom?
As far as, without being protectionist, we protect Indian people, Indian industry, legitimate ways, whether it's safeguard duty or anti-dumping duty, from cheap, improper exports from China is good for us. They are our major competitors all over the world. To the extent they have a problem, we should support our industries here, not protectionist, but again dumping and special safeguard duties. But yes, to the extent that there is a downside, these things all have upside. They export very cheap to other countries and other countries allow those things to come in. To that extent, we will lose markets.
As far as India is concerned, we're slightly siloed. we have a far more, we have a democracy, we have a functional domestic market, which for all means and purposes has not been affected. And if the positive dividends from the oil prices can be corralled properly, we have a unique situation. And it's not just China. Look what's happening in Brazil. Look what's happening in Turkey. Look what's happening in Russia. There is no BRICS. India is the one which stands out.
India has been known for its entrepreneurship. I'm very glad that the government has set aside money, government has set aside time and energy to create a policy framework. If India Incorporate has to succeed, it will succeed because our people are entrepreneurs, and that nimbleness, that flexibility it is going to show. So I am a big advocate of entrepreneurship, and I strongly believe that it is not only a startup India, it has to be a startup Tech Mahindra, it has to be a startup large companies also.
All right, that's it then. It's a wrap here on Davos Direct in this edition. Stay tuned to ET Now to get everything that you need to know from the World Economic Forum 2016. Tomorrow, we'll come back with a fresh edition, more voices, and of course, views that truly matter.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.